We are live. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon.
Oh,
Hey, so I am super excited to get this conversation going. So, first things first, before I do introductions, I want to make sure that we are all here for the same purpose for all of our viewers. This topic is called Understanding the Root Cause of Poverty. So, again, this is understanding the root cause of poverty. And I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to make sure that they are in the right workshop. So, my name is Jessica De Jesus. I am the director for Albany Community Action Partnerships Community and Career Services Program. Been with the organization for about 23 years now. And I am super excited to start introducing our guests, our panelists. So I'm going to start with Mark. Mark Emanation. Can you please correct the last name for me? Because I know I
Oh,
just did
it's
that.
just emanation.
Emanation. Oh, see, that slides off nicely. So Mark is the director for the Capital District Area Labor Federation. He is a longtime labor and social justice activist and leader that has worked in several states over decades. Next, I have Bonnie Nelson. Hi, Bonnie.
hi.
Hi, Bonnie Nelson joined Captain Community Human Services in 2013 and has worked with under-resourced individuals and families for over 25 years. For the past 8 years, she's managed Captain's Family Development Mentoring Program and the Emergency Family Assistance Program. Next, I have Kishana Owens Cody. Welcome and good afternoon. Kishana is the senior, hi. Kishana is the Senior Director of Community Empowerment at Alliance for Better Health. Kishana's role encompasses building and fostering social care networks that are responsive to the complex care needs in our communities. Everybody that is viewing, they have the opportunity to read the full bios. So, everybody, super excited to start off with our first question. So, drum roll. How do you define poverty? And I know that it's a large question. Who would like to take a stab at that one?
I could go. We define poverty as a lack of resources or a lack of access to resources. So the extent to which an individual, a family, or even a community lacks resources or access to them.
Okay, thank you.
To add on to what Bonnie said, I also look at it in that way too. It's in defining it that way, but I also think of Maslow hierarchy of needs, in recognizing, in order to get to self-actualization and meet that paradigm, those foundational elements, with the psychological safety, that's poverty right there. So if we're not addressing food insecurity, shelter, water access, to water and safety, all those different elements also play into the definition of poverty.
Okay.
And all I'm going to say is that I think it's a human right to have a decent life, that you don't have to constantly worry about every single thing and not have enough, that it's a human right. And there was an old saying when I was growing up that, I'm too poor to pay attention. And I never really knew what that meant until the crisis of 2008, 2010, when I went bankrupt, lost my house, lost 3 jobs that I was knitting together life, got foreclosed on, and went bankrupt. And I'm telling this story because during that time period where I was struggling to do that, which took months and months to fight that, I literally would wake up so upset that I couldn't even pay attention and go forward. And I would imagine people that are living in homeless shelters, or they're living on the street, or they're like, you can't figure out how to feed their kids. That's what's facing them all the time, every single day. So poverty is like overwhelming.
I appreciate that story, Mike, and Mark, and what I hear, um, and what I see in the background is, poverty has many faces. Poverty has many, many faces.
Yeah. If I could, to expand on what Mark is saying, what you're describing is that sort of tyranny of the moment where you're living in a very concrete reality and you're solving immediate problems that require immediate solutions. And the amount of time you can think ahead and plan ahead into the future is maybe 24 hours, because you're in that cycle of solving those immediate urgent problems and crises every day. And you're right, there isn't that bandwidth to take a breath and not, and think ahead and plan ahead.
Absolutely. And then here we come along with our great programs, and we want our folks to take in all this information at one time, when sometimes all they need is a couple of days worth of food so they can even just get through the night. So most definitely. Now, I do want to remind everybody that's watching and that's joining us that there is an option to throw some comments in there. So as we're talking, I am monitoring the comment section so that I can throw out questions to the panelists as well. So please do not hesitate, and make sure to throw your thoughts and ideas into the comment sections. So I am going to move on to the second question. So, what do you consider to be the root cause of poverty? Who wants to take a stab at that one? And go ahead, Bonnie.
The research shows that the causes of poverty are really on a continuum. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of factors, everything from, the stereotype that it's individual behaviors and choices, right? If you're in poverty, it's something you've done wrong. It's so much bigger than that. It's everything from community conditions, exploitation, political and economic structures, like you were saying earlier, Mark, the 2008 financial crisis. That was a perfect example of a political and economic situation that individuals had little or no control over, and caused so many people to end up in poverty.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I also think about just the way our communities are kind of constructed as well, and the access to resources and what's actually available in some communities. Being that this is statewide, and we're working, I know a lot of us are representing the capital region, but we have rural, we have urban, and throughout our state, as you're driving through different communities, you can see the changes in what resources are actually accessible. So I think about that too in terms of root cause, like what do I actually have access to? I know there's throughout the day, we talked about food deserts and things like that, just access to healthy food, access to affordable and quality housing. So I think of, like, when thinking about root cause, I think about those things as well in terms of, what's the infrastructure and what supports are actually available in all of our communities.
I think it's useful to look at this poverty on beyond my area, beyond the state, beyond the country. Worldwide, half of the people on the planet are living in dire poverty, over 4 billion people. And about a half a billion are living on less than, are living on like $1 a day. And in this country, if you just do the government's thing, which is absurd, it's about 40 million people. And if you do the Alice thing and, other things, it's about 150 million people. At the same time, we're the richest country in the history of the world. And the billionaires, the tons that are here in the United States and here in New York State, but all over the world, they're the root cause. Like the have and have nots, just to be honest with this. And I think it's important especially for food providers and people that are working in this, is like, this doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be this way. And so what can we do about that? Where you have some person in this country with $200 billion and some person in this country going to bed in a tent without enough food to eat or any medical care.
Absolutely. Mark, everything that you said. So as I was preparing for this, of course, good old Google, I type in the question just to kind of see what comes up. And a lot of the things that we ultimately have control over as a powerful nation were the top areas that came up. homelessness, inadequate nutrition, inadequate childcare, lack of health care, unsafe neighborhoods, undersourced schools, right? And so that's kind of exactly the way that you're explaining this. Like these are some very tangible things that there could be some real resolution to. Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
to Kishana's point, though, the solutions are not one size fits all because, like you were saying, the different communities are experiencing different challenges and different types of poverty. The solutions that might help a rural community would be very different than an urban community.
Absolutely. Great points. Great points. Um, just to give a note, I'm looking at a comment right now from Dr. Angela Pearson. She said, "Thank you for all the work that you do to support Food for All." She shared a little bit of her story, but I just wanted to make sure you guys receive the big thank you from Dr. Angela Pearson. So on to the next question. And oftentimes this question is seen as a difficult question to kind of have conversations around, but I think this is an important question. And the more that we speak on it, the more that we actually cast it into the air. So what role does racism and discrimination play in poverty? Let's
Yeah.
go.
I'll start. I'll kick it off. And the more research that comes out around redlining and various like policies and procedures that had racial undertones, the more we're starting to see that overlay of that a lot of the communities that are underserved, that are facing poverty, are those same communities that were deserted and lacked access to kind of escape poverty. So I think that if you're in public health and you're starting to, you're seeing more data and more resources come available. I know that we were fortunate last or 2 years ago, sorry, because of COVID, the pandemic, we had the author of Eviction come to the Capital Region and presented a lot of data around housing insecurity, and redlining was a big part of even what he discussed. So I definitely believe there's a lot of press right now and a lot of different programs and policies being looked at around racism as a public health crisis. So I think that we're going to continue to see that unfold. But yes, I definitely feel that racism and discrimination has a role, unfortunate active role in poverty.
Absolutely.
I think of things like voter access and voters' rights and gerrymandering, and just in the current events, some of the states that are passing these very restrictive voting laws that are designed by nature to disenfranchise people of color.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to add is like, if you look at the poverty statistics, Black and brown communities, Native American communities, but women, and especially households headed by women, it's the first people that lost their jobs in the pandemic. They're underpaid jobs in the first place. When you look at the essential workers, which might as well be called expendable workers, because they didn't, it's one thing to say we're going to beep the horn when we drive by the place you work, and it's another thing giving you the stuff you need to like have a decent life and to not die while you're working. And a lot of those jobs are held by women, and so the discrimination and and not to mention our 11 million undocumented sisters and brothers, and it's got to be. You can't talk about this without talking about those things. And if you're trying to work on this, you got to bend the stick in the direction to try to solve some of those problems.
Absolutely. And to bring it down to more grassroots level, I would like to push a little bit and ask more specifically within the work that you all do, and especially with the roles that you play, which are significant in communities, especially impoverished communities and communities with individuals of color. Talk a little bit about what you see on your day to day and what are some of perhaps some best practices or something that you might want to add to this more on a grassroots level.
One thing that comes to mind, to kind of piggyback off Mark's comments about undocumented immigrants, I'm working with someone right now who is not able to get a COVID vaccine.
Mm.
And that is seriously jeopardizing his ability to work right now. And it's because he's undocumented and doesn't have the proper papers to have access to that vaccine.
And that's a great point. I'm looking at a comment right now which shares that as a result of women losing their low wage jobs, their children continue the generational nature of poverty, which is also right when we're talking about long-term effects and generational effects. You know what you shared, Mark, specifically about women. What's to become of the next generation, right? So these struggles that we're seeing right now, especially with the pandemic, are not just going to clear or go away once we, finish cutting checks or trying to boost the economy in little ways. All have shown to definitely support families. But boy, oh boy, when we see 2022 come, we're gonna start seeing some true effects going on here. So, and another comment here, the comments are starting to come through. So if you see my eyes going to the side, I'm trying to keep track of some of the comments here. Um, Someone is sharing that recession is a good example. Stress causes psychological deterioration, which in turn makes it harder to get work and perform well, and so on. So definitely the physical impacts of poverty. Um, Someone is sharing might be more persuasive in rural communities with smaller minority populations. In the country that I serve, you can see large Confederate flags flying outside of homes in 3 towns within a healthy walk of food pantries in those communities. And so, thank you for those comments because I did want to just bring it down a little bit into some of our day-to-day work and highlight that just in our customers basic walk to get to some of our services and even some of the red tape that they have to go through to get some basic services. Sometimes we have to step back and think about what are we doing, even if unintentional, when we are
Yeah.
participating in some services and some of the programs that we offer, and really challenge ourselves to look at our day-to-day work and take a step back and ask yourself that question as you're providing services. What am I currently doing that has some role to play in this, even if unintentional? So I'm gonna go on to another question. And so for everybody watching at the end, we will open it up to just some free flowing conversation, and I will be monitoring the questions as well and the comments. Um, so what are the effects of poverty? So what happens? Drum roll.
One of the biggest things that I see on a daily basis is loss of hope.
Hmm.
Um, just those feelings of powerlessness and hopelessness. And once you go there, it's really hard to move forward because what does it matter anyway? Nothing I do is going to change the situation. It is what it is.
It's almost like an institutionalization, right? That mindset. And you ever notice that sometimes customers, here at ACAP, we call the families that we serve customers. And, we notice that sometimes customers will come in and it's just like, all right, tell me what you want from me. My firstborn child, my last born, my DNA. What do I have to give you in order for me just to get some basic resources?
Uh-huh.
And even if that's not how we operate here at ACAP, because of all of the systems that are actually in play and intertwined with one family unit, it gets to the point that they're just like, it's bionic. It's just, all right, what do I got to do now? Yes, I'm going to answer yes to every single question because that's what I need to do to get a service so that we don't go hungry.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
When I was looking at this question, the first thing I wrote down was, and I'm sorry to be this way, but death, right? A couple years ago, the Times Union did an article on life expectancy. And so the life expectancy in Hamilton Hill and Schenectady versus life expectancy in somewhere you could walk to, Niskayuna, right outside it, is 20 years. The life expectancy between North Central Troy, which is one of the 10 poorest neighborhoods in the United States, and Loudonville, which you also could walk to, although there'll be a lot of uphill stuff. I probably wouldn't walk there, but is 20 years. And so when you look at it just like that, if you don't have healthcare, if you don't have housing that's really decent, airy, healthy housing, if you don't have healthy food, if you don't have all of these things that make, and also what the point about the self-esteem and all of this, it means your life expectancy is less. And it's not simply a case, jobs, apprenticeships, higher wages, pre-apprenticeships. My mother worked from 16 to 18 part-time, 18 to 70 full-time, and 70 to 76 part-time. And when those years when she was retired, she didn't have enough money to live on unless people were helping. Get a job is not something you're going to say to her. And so it's a whole value system I think we need to change.
Absolutely.
What's important.
You just outlined the social determinants of health.
Right.
And isn't it funny sometimes when people make up a term, right? And you're like, dude, this is not new. You boxed it, right? It is not taking anything away from the social determinants of health, right? Because they box it. And sometimes you have to take it for what it's worth, right? Okay, if this is what it means that we have to do in order for people to pay attention, right? All right, so now we'll use that term. But what Mark is saying is this is what has been happening.
Right.
This has been our experiences. And these are examples that go way beyond the boxing of social determinants of health. So absolutely.
Yeah. And I love that you pulled that full circle, because when I'm teaching and I talk about social determinants of health and I put up that image, underneath, all I can think about is toxic stress or stress. So that was like the first thing that came to me, is like just the weight of all of that. Like when you do look at the social determinants of health grid, or you just think of poverty overall, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, of like the day-to-day, like just trying to, like, being in constant survival mode, not knowing like what's coming next, like what's coming at you, what's in front of you, that unfortunate, like not having that opportunity to really plan is huge. But stress came to my mind. And then just even thinking about communities that are saturated with poverty, like what's that stress look like in those communities? What do we see? Like what's the, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot, trauma comes to mind.
Several people phoned in and said trauma. Absolutely. But Kishana, there was a very strong, I'm looking at one comment and I'm just going to grab the end of it because it caught my eye and it goes into what you're saying. Angela shared, poverty robs people of their dignity and basic knowledge of how to get ahead. How simple of a tagline is that, right? But it is powerful. Because if you're always in the rat race, if every day is a struggle, if every day is a rat race, every day you're just trying to figure out, how am I going to just survive the day? How do you ever tap into the amazingness of what you can be? Right? That's a very powerful statement. Wow. Good stuff. But definitely trauma has popped up several times.
And that trauma becomes cyclical too, because then you get into ACEs and
yes, most definitely. Definitely want to highlight the folks that are making sure that we do not forget about the rural communities, and how their experience in poverty can be way different than absolutely than oftentimes what most of even these panel discussions are about, right? So oftentimes when we talk about poverty, and service providers and how do we get ahead, um, oftentimes the rural aspect is that thrown in the piece. Well, yeah, rural poverty. And so thank you for everybody that's chiming in and highlighting rural poverty as well. I see the comments and I am acknowledging them.
So one thing that we've been doing since last June was the mass food distributions. We helped build a really good coalition that the Regional Food Bank and Catholic Charities program, CC Move, are the heart of. But the Labor Federation came on, and we realized that before the pandemic, that 20% of our membership, union members, were going to food pantries. So we wanted to help, and we got involved in this. So we've done a bunch of them in rural areas: Hoosick Falls, Hudson Falls, Fort Edward, Johnstown, Burn Knox, Westerlo, Grafton. And what we've learned from that is that, you have the thing, you open it up at 9:30 in the morning, and there's already 500 cars lined up when you open it up. And some of the cars are duct taped together. I mean, and you're hoping they don't run, go out before, we get them food. And we've run out of food in most of those places. One of the things is they don't have food pantries, distribution, all the things that you might be able to have if you're in a city where you have those things. You don't have advocates. You don't have all these things. And it's heartbreaking. Imagine if you could get those people side by side together with the people in, say, North Central Troy, and you could get them to see their commonness of what they're up against and their common humanity, and you could build something with that. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Thank you, Mark, for sharing that. And that definitely is all phenomenal and valid points in that, especially when we've been looking at the news in terms of the pandemic and in terms of access to food. For me, in our food pantry in the city of Cohoes, our numbers have gone down. And I don't think, and it's not because the need for food is less. It's just because I'm in a city area in which there is an enormous amount of support services. Every time I turn around, there's mass distributions. And there's so many community partners right there that's willing to help. So it impacted our numbers in the food pantry. But when you look at some of the rural communities, it's like, hello, can you share the love? Can we get some of that over here? Elena brought up a great point. And actually, it's something that we don't talk about, and it's proven point because we haven't shared about it yet. She's saying that the conversation is reminding her of the topic of self-care and how essential it is that our longevity and overall physical, mental health, how she says, we don't talk enough about how self-care is a luxury. Many people aren't lucky enough to set aside time for themselves. This leads to a downward trajectory of deteriorating health, right? So also a valid point. Thank you, Elena, for that. I'm going to go into, so it's 2:30 now. We are done at 2:50. This is great conversation. So we are doing great on time. I am going to go into the last question about, I'm going to go into the last question, and I'm really going to ask that everyone that is joining us throw in some answers to this last question, because ultimately this is not just about the panel that is currently speaking. It also is about everybody else's ideas and thoughts on this topic. And then at the end of that final question, we'll go into just an honest dialogue and a great closure. So probably the hardest question. I think we all agree. How do we move forward, right? So if the opening topic was understanding the root cause of poverty, we've had all this great dialogue. And now I'm hitting you over the head with, how do we move forward? What are some thoughts on that? Jump right in.
I think one of the biggest, if not the most important step in that direction is for people in poverty to be at the decision-making tables, um, to be part of the solution. When policies are made and programs are developed to address poverty, they rarely, if ever, include people who are actually experiencing the poverty in that conversation and at the tables where these decisions are made. So a lot of times what we see, even as agencies, is some of the programs and the services that we develop kind of miss the mark a little bit because we're not asking the people who it actually impacts.
Great point, Bonnie. And again, leading back to what was said a while ago, if you're in the rat race, right? So if you're just trying to get by, how do we make opportunities for those that are actually experiencing poverty, those that are actually going through the motions of what is happening in the day-to-day life? How do we bring them to the table, right? How do we make space at the table for them? How do we give them their own table, right? How do we bring their words without also asking them for an hour of their life when they barely have 2 minutes for even self-care, right? So oftentimes we're putting out surveys, we're asking for community input, we're doing focus groups, and then we get frustrated because folks don't show up, or you have the same one that shows up all the time. And then you have to go back and report that you had minimal participation. But it doesn't mean that you had minimal participation because people are not wanting to share, but have we really thought about how do you bring that voice to the table? Great points. Come
Go ahead,
on
Bonnie,
now.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kashana.
I was just going to say, I don't think that we can ever minimize education at every point that we are working with people. I think that there's lots of opportunity. As we mentioned, social determinants of health is, I hate to call it a buzzword, but it came out, it almost feels that way sometimes. But now we have the healthcare system is screening for social determinants of health and making those connections. But there's other industries that also could be a part of contributing to building resilience in everyone. There's lots of opportunities for public health, like to leverage like our public health workforce and bring like they're looking at communities on a day-to-day basis and looking at what different needs. They have a community health needs assessment. Like how does that pull into economic development? No community should have a food desert, but do these two partners work together? Or is public health kind of at the same table when they're looking at community needs as the economic developers, and same with employers as well. Employers spend a lot of time making different benefits packages. Are there opportunities to be really creative and innovative, especially as we're talking about getting people back into the workforce? What matters to the communities that we serve, and let's not miss an opportunity to have a teachable moment and help people really get back on their feet, get stable, and be resilient through all these obstacles and challenges that they're facing.
Absolutely.
So 23 states in the United States have the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour. Pennsylvania, which is not far from here, which has cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, $7.25 an hour. So some of this stuff to me is concrete, like, raise the federal minimum wage, raise the upstate minimum wage of $12.50 an hour to a real wage. $15 an hour isn't a real wage. But that's only part of it. One of the things, Jessica, you said that like your food pantry and co's is not. They just passed that thing where it gave more money to folks, SNAP and stuff like that. So it helped. That should be like made permanent. That's 1 year of that. But make those things and expand them. And then we talk in the unions about infrastructure jobs. And the federal government's talking infrastructure jobs, and they talk about them. Bridges, roads, and broadband internet in rural areas and stuff like that in all over the place. I'm all for that. Bridges, road, you could put every unemployed person in the city of Albany to work just filling in the potholes. But imagine if we thought about infrastructure much bigger than that, that there was a health clinic everywhere, that we trained 100,000 mental health counselors in New York State and addiction services and things like that, that we had everything our schools needed rather than nothing our schools need, that the things like we haven't built public housing for people that was affordable since the 1970s. So say we do rent control tomorrow and it only goes up 2% a year. If you're paying $1,000 for a terrible flat in the middle of an underserved neighborhood, and they only raise it, you're already paying way more money than you could possibly pay, 50% of your income. So these things have to change. And those are demands that the federal government and the state government, New York State's the 9th largest economy in the world. So you could demand New York State tax the wealthy, don't let them have the massive tax breaks and to hide their money in the Cayman Islands, tax them and use that money. And all that will help everybody. The economy will grow massively. If I got an extra couple bucks in my pocket and I got a decent place to live and I'm eat all those things, I'll go out and buy like a new toaster. I want more toasters. You know what I mean? And so I think there's like concrete things that we need to do. And I agree with what the folks before this is like the people that are coming to our food distributions and our pantries and our programs, they got to be the folks leading that movement to change this country. They were in the past. The people that were in the civil rights movement were working class and poor African Americans that led other people. That's what we need now. Not all of us. Yeah. We need to really, that 150 million that doesn't know, like if they lose their job, they're homeless in 2 months or living on somebody's couch. All of those people need to come together and say, we can be the agents of change. And so we got to figure out how to do that. That's the key. Is how do you get them inspired in their self-worth, not their oppression, but their self-worth. That you can inspire them. It's like, you can do this. You can be a leader of this, and we can change this. I believe we can.
Wow. Very powerful. Very, very powerful. As you were talking, I'm looking at comments here. And so to piggyback off of what you're saying, Mark, Heidi chimed in and said, you have to change how poverty is viewed, destigmatize asking for help as a whole across the nation, not just the world. Those who never lived in poverty do not understand it. And so when you take Heidi's comment and listening to what you were just saying, Mark, and in saying, you know what, everyone who's in this circumstance, if there was a way to get everybody together and allow them to speak their language, imagine how powerful that is. Because Heidi's absolutely right. Everybody doesn't understand the poverty of language. And poverty has so many faces. It's not just a group. It's not a race. It's not a community. Because if nothing else, when the pandemic hit, it sure showed the faces of poverty in areas where we're like, no, not that community. Most definitely that community. I appreciate that comment, Mark. We are at 40 minutes right now. I am trying to be the best timekeeper possible, right? I'm going to do it. And I'm seeing a bunch of comments come in. So I'm going to go through some of the comments right now. And you guys, as I'm speaking, most definitely please chime in. But I'm seeing some great stuff popping up. Let's see. And Trevor again shared, and piggybacking off of what you were sharing, Mark. We need to actually empower people and not just problem solve for them, right? So again, allowing folks to share their story. What does this look like for them? What does a resolve look like, right? Because oftentimes, especially those of us that are in the field of helping, right? Sometimes we even have to be mindful of the words that we're using, right? Are we helping? Are we teaching? Are we supporting? Are we giving a handout? Even in our day-to-day terminology. And so to Trevor's point, no, we're not just going to problem solve. for somebody, we're actually bringing folks to the table the way that Mark shared. I've seen a couple of comments about voting for candidates that truly answer to the community needs and keep them accountable, right? So, for those of us that are big in watching our candidates, being mindful, and not only always looking at the big picture and what the big top offices are. I am not going into politics right now, but being mindful of who within our community are lead gatekeepers, right? Because it doesn't always necessarily mean actually who needs a ballot, but who are your gatekeepers? How do you bring folks like that to the table? I think that when we were talking about how do we get folks' voices to the table, I see Carolyn chimed in and said, we got to go to where they are, not wait for them to come to us. And that's a great point as well. And then when we go back and look at our programs, right, trying to analyze, do we have any restrictions in that area? If we see that we serve all of Albany County, but, Westerlo is lacking support services right now, do we have the flexibility and the ability to actually go to the powers that be and say, we need to restructure some of our support services and move on down the road? Is that even an option for us? Do we even have those conversations? Go ahead. Let's again with the elected officials. Absolutely. A lot of kudos to Mark for your last comments. And Dr. Angela Pearson again shared, must get the mind and hearts of the people impacted. And so I do want to hone in on that for a second, because I see a lot of comments around, and I think what I'm hearing is a lot of the conversation is around, how do we at the table fix this? What do we do? What do we bring to the table? Especially in speaking of our services. But can anybody share any ways that you may have seen or been a part of, or have a wild imagination of ways to bring folks to this conversation? I've tried all of the above, and it is often difficult to get participation, um, and then having to explain to the powers that be that it's not because they are not interested in their own path. It is because life is happening before their very eyes. What are some ways that we could potentially look at bringing the voices of the people that are truly impacted to the table, so that their voice and their ideas and their stories are in our contracts, in our funding lines? How do we begin that conversation?
I think it starts by building relationships of mutual respect
Mm.
and letting go of that kind of power imbalance that, we as agencies or government entities or whatever, we know what's wrong with you. We know what the problem is, and we know how to fix it. We know how to fix you. Building those relationships of mutual respect. At Captain, we have a mentoring program and our Bridges Out of Poverty Getting Ahead program, where we come alongside people and work with them as they determine their own goals and their own plans for working on those goals, and they're making their own arguments for change. We're not telling them what we think they need to do to get out of poverty. We're coming alongside them. We're working to help them build resources and identify what their strengths are, what their threats and opportunities are, what they need, what they want and need to work on developing and building. And we're actually in the process of putting together an advisory council that will work with our senior team and our board of directors, and that will include people that we work with in our various programs, people from poverty who are the experts. They're the problem solvers and the experts. And the next step from that will be a seat on the board of directors for a graduate of our Getting Ahead program. So that's just, it's one small agency, one small program, but it's one way that we're trying to do that.
One of the things I think is important is that we're all in this together. And when the cars, once we sort the food and stuff, I try to take a little time to walk along the cars and say, hey, thanks for coming today. It's so good to see you. Because I'm not giving them food. I'm building a community with them. And this week, I'm putting the food in the car. Next week, I'm getting food in the car. And how can we make a better world out of our experience in this? And I've met all these remarkable people through that. And we've done census work. We've done tenant work where the people come and they get that in their bag. They get other resources in their bag. We've done voter registration. We're trying to do this. I think one thing that's really important is that every single person has a role in this. We have to start thinking that this is unacceptable, that this is a moral, this is like having poverty in a country of riches is a sin. And I'm not trying to be religious here. I'm just talking about, the way I was raised, that has to be unacceptable. And worldwide, when they talk about 40,000 children a day dying to the effects of poverty, this is the central issue of our time. And that 30, 40 years from now, if we're still sitting around, and hopefully not in a Zoom thing or whatever this is, but, sitting around saying, how do we solve this? We won't have anything to solve. Because this thing, you either get this better or, comes back to us. And I think we can do that. And I don't think anybody that's listening or anybody that's sitting around their kitchen table tonight or anywhere they are doesn't have a role in this, no matter how impoverished they might be or how wealthy they might be, how powerful they might be. And so you have an elected official that's not helping in this or just showing up to take a picture with you, got to call them out, call her out, call them out, whatever they,
Absolutely.
and it's just wrong. It's RONG wrong.
We are down to the final minute. Does everybody want to throw out one word that you would like to leave everybody with? Or two. I'm going to steal your statement and say this is unacceptable. And I'm closing on that. You're on mute, Bonnie. We're down to the last couple of seconds. Anybody want to close out their statement? Thank you for everybody that has watched.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks. Good stuff. Everybody's chiming in, sharing that this has been great conversations. If there are no more final comments, I bid everybody farewell and was super excited to participate in this conversation. And I hope that the conversation keeps moving further along.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey, Mark, this is Brian May. You had called me yesterday regarding a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. And I just wanted to give you a call, see if I could help you. I can be reached at my cell phone,